What if a father, in the name of hospitality, offered his daughters to be ravaged by a mob? Would you call him a hero or a monster? Get ready for an unsettling biblical tale that will make the hair on your neck stand up, fall down, and maybe fall off. Lot, a man of the ancient city of Sodom, found himself in a predicament that is, to say the least, morally challenging. He was faced with a mob, hungry and demanding outside his door. Their target? His two esteemed guests, who were, unbeknownst to the mob, angels in disguise. In a shocking twist, Lot offered his own daughters to the mob to protect his guests. This act at first glance seems horrifying and unfathomable. How could a father be willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood? But let's draw the curtains back a bit and look at the world Lot was living in. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was not just a nicety, but a sacred duty. To fail in protecting one's guests was seen as a grave sin, a direct affront to the gods. Lot's offer then can be seen as a desperate attempt to uphold this sacred law, even at the cost of his daughter's innocence, to put it nicely. Yet this doesn't fully explain Lot's actions. Why didn't he fight the mob? Why didn't he call for help? Why did he choose to offer his daughters instead? One popular defense and argument that some rely on to justify and explain Lot's ridiculous actions is to simply chalk this off as a reflection of the deeply patriarchal society of his time, where women were often seen as less valuable than men. If you ask me, it shouldn't matter whether women were seen as less valuable than men when we are talking about allowing harm to come to our own children. If you're in the mood for an even dumber justification for this pathetic weasel's cowardly actions, then allow me to entertain you by revealing that some suggest that Lot was just testing the mob, hoping they would refuse his offer and leave. So let me get this straight. This moron thought that this demanding mob that was ready and willing to ravage two men would pass up on an offer to ravage his daughters instead. Whatever the case, this story forces us to grapple with some uncomfortable truths about human nature, morality, and the lengths to which one might go to uphold one's principles. Not, anyhow. Let's explore this a little further. Hospitality, a virtue esteemed above all in ancient times. But how far should one go? In the biblical narrative, hospitality was not just a custom or manner of etiquette, but a sacred duty. To fail in providing hospitality was to fail in one's fundamental obligations to God and humanity. This principle is echoed in both canonical and non-canonical scriptures. For instance, in the book of Genesis, we see Abraham rushing to serve three strangers who turn out to be divine messengers. In the non-canonical book of Tobit, the protagonist is revered for his generous hospitality towards the destitute and the displaced. This sacred duty was so ingrained that it often overrode personal considerations. A host was expected to protect their guest at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing their own well-being or that of their family. This brings us to the disturbing story of Lot, who offered his daughters to an angry mob to protect his angelic guests. But how does this ancient ideal of hospitality compare with our modern understanding? Today, hospitality is seen as a courteous gesture, a means of fostering relationships, and a way to show respect for others. We open our homes for dinner parties or holiday gatherings. We offer our guests the best seat in the house, the choicest food on our table. But we are not expected to endanger our lives or those of our loved ones. Our modern society values the sanctity of individual rights and personal safety above the obligation of hospitality. A father today would be expected to protect his children over his guests. In fact, the kind of hospitality displayed by Lot would be seen as a gross violation of moral and ethical boundaries. If Lot were a real man, he'd offer his own innocence to the mob in order to protect the innocence of his daughters. But apparently, in the context of Lot's time, his actions may have been seen as a fulfillment of his duty as a host, despite the horrifying implications. This story serves as a stark reminder of just how retarded these old perceptions of duty, morality, and hospitality really were. The line between duty and morality blurs when hospitality demands too much. Two innocent lives offered as a shield against the mob. What drove Lot to this extreme? Did the wheel in his head spin backwards? Lot's decision to offer his daughters to a raging mob to protect his angelic guests is fraught with symbolism and layered with complexities that reflect the societal norms and moral codes of his time. If this sounds absolutely ridiculous to you, you're absolutely not alone. In biblical times, the obligation to protect a guest was paramount, even if it meant endangering one's own family. This act was not just about hospitality, it was about honor. In Lot's mind, his guests, who were angels, represented a divine presence. By offering his daughters, he was choosing to uphold the honor of his divine guests, even if it meant sacrificing the sanctity of his family. This interpretation is supported by canonical evidence. In the book of Genesis, Lot says, "I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold now, I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing." Here, Lot's desperate plea reveals his commitment to protect his heavenly guests at all costs. All costs except granting the mob full access to his own cavities. I would argue that there's a reasonable explanation for this. Perhaps it's that Lot's cavities have known man. Now, let's look at non-canonical scriptures. In the first book of Adam and Eve, there's a reference to Lot's act as a test of his faith. The scripture suggests that Lot's decision was a demonstration of his obedience to God's will, a view that sheds light on the extremities he was willing to go to in order to uphold his spiritual duty. Apparently, Lot was under the impression that God's will was for Lot to volunteer his 2 virgin daughters to submit to defilement by this mob. This act of offering his daughters for defilement is a horrifying concept in today's context. It's a stark contrast to our modern understanding of parental love and protection. But it's crucial to remember that we're examining a time and context vastly different from our own. Were all people living during those times mentally challenged? Of course not. There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for Lot's actions. Treading the path of righteousness often leads to unimaginable sacrifices. Lot's story is a profound testament to this, a tale that compels us to question, reflect, and ponder the depths of faith and the complexities of moral duty. Why did the angels, heavenly beings of supreme power, remain silent spectators to Lot's act? A question that has intrigued biblical scholars and laymen alike. The angels, divine envoys, sent to protect and guide, yet in this tale, they seem to take on a role that is far more passive than we might expect. What should we make of the angels' silence and apparent inaction in the face of Lot's unthinkable offer? Now, it's essential to remember that angels in biblical narratives are often more than mere characters. They are symbols, embodiments of divine will, and agents of the heavenly realm. They operate within the bounds set by the divine, their actions, or in this case their lack thereof, echoing the intricate balance of divine justice and human free will. Some interpretations suggest that the angel's silence was not a sign of acquiescence, but a reflection of the divine test Lot was undergoing. Much like Abraham, who was tested with the sacrifice of his son Isaac, Lot was faced with a horrifying choice, a test of his faith and his commitment to divine hospitality. By not intervening, the angels allowed Lot to make his choice, to demonstrate his understanding of divine laws. On the other hand, contrasting interpretations argue that the angel's silence symbolizes the divine disapproval of Lot's decision. The angels, being divine beings, could not endorse such a morally reprehensible act. Their silence, therefore, was not a sign of passive observation, but a profound statement of disapproval. The only thing that doesn't make sense about this interpretation, other than everything, is that it doesn't make sense and is quite possibly the dumbest interpretation that I've had to tell you about. Yet, regardless of which interpretation one leans towards, what remains clear is that the angel's silence is a pivotal element of this narrative. It highlights the complex interplay between divine will and human morality, the delicate balance between heavenly justice and earthly hospitality. It reminds us that even in the face of horrifying choices, the divine is always watching, always testing, and always guiding. Even divine beings are bound by the complex web of morality and duty. This tale of Lot and his daughters and the silent angels serves as a stark reminder of this universal truth. A father today would lay down his life for his children. So why did Lot choose differently? In our modern society, we view the parent-child relationship through a lens shaped by centuries of societal and cultural evolution. Today, the thought of a parent willingly offering their children to potential harm is unthinkable, a violation of the most sacred duty of protection and care. So, how can we reconcile this with Lot's decision? In my opinion, we can't. But let me tell it from the perspective of the lowlife, unintelligent beings that have a different opinion than I do. First, they want you to remember that the world of Lot was vastly different from ours. The societal norms, the cultural expectations, and the very concept of morality was not what we understand today. Lot's world was one where hospitality was not just a courtesy, but a sacred duty, a societal obligation that could supersede even the bonds of family. But does this justify Lot's actions? From our modern perspective, the answer is a resounding no. However, it does provide us with context, a framework within which we can attempt to understand his choices. Lot was not acting out of malice or indifference towards his daughters. Rather, he was caught in a clash of duties, torn between the obligation to protect his guests and the love for his family. Today, we have the benefit of hindsight and centuries of ethical discourse. We have established child rights and parental responsibilities. We have laws and societal structures that prioritize the safety and well-being of children. In stark contrast, Lot was navigating a moral landscape that was as harsh and unforgiving as the desert he lived in. However, this is not to say that we should dismiss the story of Lot as a mere product of its time. On the contrary, it serves as a stark reminder of the complex, often controversial nature of historical morality.